Alright. Probably maybe, that's good enough. Welcome everybody to Tenchi Muyo 101, No Need for an Ohayocon panel. Presented by the good folks at Tenchiforum, that's us, and Dualfans. Now, before we get started, how many of you are Tenchi fans or have seen the show before? That's a nice show of hands. Okay, how many people haven't seen it but were interested? That works. And how many are here because there's another panel, but because we're at 1:30, what other panels are there? At any rate, whether you are a long-time fan or someone who just got into it, the perfect icebreaker to Tenchi Muyo is the legendary Toonami problem. And that's what the what? The Toonami problem. The 2-minute one. No.
A Shinto shrine deep in rural Japan. A boy trains diligently. Soon he will become a man. Now is the time to learn the Kitanis. Tenchi Masaki. In an instant, the reality tension rolls around shattered. He will enter a world where princesses traverse the galaxy in living ships. Space pirates wander and live. And galaxy police patrol the stars, protecting the sun. The most important discovery here is that 6 crazy women living under the same roof all have the hots for him. Close your eyes, Tenchi. Now, you have to deal with guardians, ancient demons, mad scientists, and shared bathroom time. The universe needs a new champion. Tenchi needs some peace and quiet. Tenchi Muyo, starting Monday, July 3rd. Only Toonami.
Yeah.
A Shinto shrine deep in rural Japan. A boy trains diligently. Little did he know he would become one of the most beloved anime series of all time. 3 OVA series, 3 movies, 2 TV series, 2 manga series, a Japanese commissioned American comic, dozens of doujinshi, and more soundtracks than the Rolling Stones had albums. 20 years later, and it's still chugging along. Tenchi Muyo consists of many continuities, but it all starts with the very first OVA. Created by character designer Kajishima Masaki, director and concept creator Hiroki Hayashi, and storyboarder and writer Naoko Hasegawa. Now, funny story. For the longest time, Kajishima has been extremely elusive. In fact, there are more pictures of Bigfoot than there are of this man. Up until now, this picture has been the most we've ever seen, and that was the back of his head, until recently. At Comic-Con, which is where tons of doujins and other such are released from groups and whatnot, he was actually out signing autographs for folks. And this is from a man who would sell through a proxy. He didn't want anybody to see who he was. And this was a picture that somebody took from a stream of Comic-Con Unfortunately, it is illegal to show streams of Comic Head for various copyright reasons, but that might be the elusive Tenchi Muyo, otherwise translated as No Need for Tenchi. Stars 17-year-old Tenchi Masaki, a cast of crazy women who all meet him through a series of unfortunate, or fortunate, or should I say unfortunate for Tenchi, events. These are princesses Ayeka and Sasami, who are the young blue-haired girl and the purple. Galaxy police officers Mikoshi and Kiyone. The universe's greatest mad scientist of all time, Washu, and everyone's favorite blue-haired space pirate, Ryoko. As you can see, Tenchi is surrounded by quite a few women. So it's no wonder that when this was released in 1992, it would have the far-reaching impact that it did on anime. Because really before this you had Urusei Yatsura, which kind of had a harem feel to it, and there was Ranma, kind of had a feel. But it was really Tenchi that kind of molded what we know as modern harem, hence why it's called the godfather of the harem genre. But despite this moniker, still had something for everybody. It had living spaceships, lightsaber swords, which, and living spaceships. Trust me, if you like anime, Tenchi has something for you. Tenchi Muyo Ryooki, known in the States as Tenchi Muyo and not to be confused with OVA3, is where our journey begins in 1992, and where we meet the majority of the cast, which is Ryoko, Ayeka, Sasami, Washu, and Mihoshi. This is what's considered canon. While the OVA starts out with Tenchi going to his father's shrine, his grandfather's shrine, and his grandfather always telling him a story. Yeah. He's always telling him a story about a demon. Well, if you tell a child not to do something, they're going to do it anyway. So Tenchi breaks into his father's shrine, their grandfather's shrine, and releases a demon we all know as Ryoko. But as dominoes fall, far off in space, a living spaceship with Princesses Ayeka and Sasami are not too far off. And where would the universe be without its galaxy police officers in Mikoshi? Now, while it didn't exactly explode at first like something like Evangelion, Tenchi's success was quick. By 1995, it was a name-brand franchise in Japan, the flagship franchise to pioneer entertainment, as you can see here by this Beatles parody CD cover. They really love Tenchi. So capitalizing on the success, AIC, who is the production company for Tenchi, made a TV series known as Tenchi Universe.
Like 3 guys in here.
Now before we go any further, Tenchi is a series made up of multiple continuities. Most series nowadays don't ever deviate from one single canon. Well, not only does Tenchi have 4 or 5, but the majority of Tenchi content isn't actually canon at all. Most of it is made up or not by the original creator. And so Tenchi is a series that, when you get into it, it's more about the characters than it is trying to follow one strict storyline. You know, it being slice of life and the Godfather and harem and the whole 9 yards. It is definitely a show that's made for the characters. Back to the TV series. Tenchi Universe, being like most TV series are, is an alternate retelling of the first OVA, or the first 6 episodes of Tenchi. So if you haven't seen Tenchi, I tried my best not to spoil it. But obviously, the majority of you have seen Tenchi. And you're awesome people. Now, the universe continuity as it starts consists of the same core characters as the OVA, with few minor altercations, including extra characters such as Nagi and Kenobi, the night versions of Azaka and Kamadaki, which you can see up there, a slightly altered version of Kagato, and the Mahoshi's partner, Kione. Kione is an integral part of the characters in the Tenchi franchise. She's the yin to Mihoshi's yang. Mihoshi is the ditzy one, who doesn't quite all have it figured out and often causes trouble, while Kione is the strong-headed, more clear-thinking of the two. It's very focused on both of them keeping their jobs. The universe itself is also very lenient, since they had to stretch out 6 episodes from the OVA into 26, and there's a little bit more filler, and there's a lot more interest on the characters themselves as opposed to the intricate derived plots of the OVA, adding a ton of characters that you've probably never seen before. We'll get to that. And you'll notice a lot of characters, like for instance in the OVA, Washu is very motherly. She's a scientist, but she's motherly. While in universe, she is an egocentric mad scientist in every sense of the word. She has ultra-viruses that can take out entire fleets of spaceships, and she's always having things. Now, continuing on with Tenchi's success, as we march into 1996, we get to the first movie, Tenchi the movie, Tenchi Muyo in Love. Now, despite the title, you may say to yourself, does Tenchi actually fall in love? Well, unfortunately, he does not. That is sad. But he does go on an epic adventure that would make Doc Brown the Great Scott. Tenchi the movie centers around, at this point, Tenchi's mother, Achika, who suddenly disappears from old movies as they are watching them, and so then Tenchi starts to disappear. And as he starts to disappear, everyone's just trying to figure out what's going on. So, Washu, being the great mad scientist that she is, decides to jump back 30 years with the rest of the crew to 1970s Japan to try and figure out what happened to Achika. 3D would probably do this movie justice as well. Well, going on further with Tokyo, Tenchi is as popular as it's ever going to be in Japan. It is at its height. So a second TV series is all but certain. However, as many of you might know from Tenchi in Tokyo, it didn't exactly gain stellar praise with the fandom, for a number of reasons. Most of those can be chalked down to soccer. However, it's an interesting story in that Tokyo originally was planned to be a sequel, a direct sequel to Tenchi Universe. What happened in between is not really certain, because as anyone who's seen the series, there are kind of 2 really main plots going on at the same time. And pictures like this, which are promo art for Tenchi in Tokyo before the series release, shows characters like Nagi and the Knights who never end up showing up at all. And so it was one of those situations where they were going along with it, and maybe the Japanese schoolgirl was becoming popular at the time, and so they decided to go with Sakuya. I don't think we'll ever really know what made the change, but one thing is certain is that Sakuya was just that. She was normal. To us, we think, why would Tenchi like a girl like that? But to Tenchi, he's been around, he's been flying all over space. He's with galaxy police officers. He's with, space pirates. He's with mad scientists. To him, maybe he sees something new in this girl who's playing like he is. It certainly wasn't boring to see the hijinks that ensued. Now, as we're going chronologically, next going back to the movies, next in the trilogy is The Daughter of Darkness, Midsummer's Eve, otherwise known in Tenchi fandom as Naoko Hasegawa's 11th novel. Now, I told you earlier that Naoko Hasegawa was one of the original creators of Tenchi. Unfortunately, as you'll see with many things that happen with creators, they tend to say it's my way or the highway. And Naoko Hasegawa and Hiroki Hayashi left. And when Naoko Hasegawa left, she wrote 13 Tenchi novels. One of those became the movie, Midsummer's Eve, Daughter of Darkness, which centers around a blue-haired girl named Mayuka. Mayuka claims to be his daughter. Now, of course, when you claim to be anything to Tenchi in a house full of women who have been barking up that tree for far longer, it's going to cause a lot of hijinks. And then, of course, Yuzuha, who comes in the very whiny-voiced, something that Tenchi kind of needed at that point, because it had big, dark, and brooding villains. And then you have Yuzuha, who's all over the place, and she's very she's very unique. And this is also the first time in a while that we see Tenchi in a holiday setting. Even though there are some shows that will do a Christmas episode, or they'll do a different episode, they really incorporated it into the Daughter of Darkness by having a similar tradition under Rai, which is where Aika and Sasami are from, and calling it Stardica. And that's kind of how the whole, and Yuzuha meets Yosho, who is Tenchi's grandfather. Now, one thing you'll notice throughout each of the Tenchi series is most of the antagonists are someone from Yosho's past love life, and they just seem to take it out on Tenchi again. And finally, in the movies, the final movie that was released with the Tree of Virtue is Ryoko, is Tenchi Forever, Tenchi Muyo in Love 2. The final chapter. Tenchi has tackled the reaches of space, the endless universes that have expanded upon it, and even survived Ryoko's cooking. But one thing that they've never done at this point was a slow burn drama, something more noir, something more down to earth. And this one really strikes it home because the first thing that happens, one thing as a Tenchi fan is, you always ask yourself, who's he going to pick? Is he going to be Ryoko or is it going to be Aika? Well, at the very beginning of the movie, they basically put him on the spot and say, pick one. And in Tenchi, classic Tenchi fashion, he's like, bye. And so he jets, and he ends up disappearing into a tree in the visage, the picture of another woman whose name is Haruna. And then he's gone. He never comes back. And so everyone is freaking out. Tenchi hasn't been seen in 6 months. And so Ryoko and Aika put their differences aside and decide to get real jobs and work around in the city and try to figure out, where's Tenchi? The most important things the most important thing in their life, and the most important thing to the show. And it's really nice to see this dynamic between Ryoko and Aika, because you see it a little bit in Universe, where they're rivals, but they are almost kind of friends. It's almost as if I'm going to one-up you just to say that I can, to say that I'm better, but not really in a way that is, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. Like they need each other. They're a dynamic that without the other, for the most part, they would almost feel kind of lost. And I won't spoil the ending for you, but I'll just put it this way. If you're a fan of Ryoko and Tenchi, you would probably appreciate it. Now, I left out OVA 3 for a number of reasons. Mainly because most of you who've probably seen OVA 3 released by Funimation raised way more questions than it did answers. So I'm going to shoot it off to you, JG.
Well, I've got the tough task of trying to squish about 20 years into 15 minutes. Let's see what we can do. To start out with, you have to realize that the Tenchiverse, as it applies to the Ryoki and OVA timeline, consists of pretty much infinite parallel dimensions. As you can see here, you've got kind of the established Tenchiverse on the left-hand side that consists of what Kagoshima Masaki has done, and then there's a series of spin-offs there on the right. Sort of like if you took a cake and each layer had a slightly different flavor, each one is slightly different from the next. We know this partially because of OVA 3 and from other sources, because the Chosen, which are Tokimi, actually going from left to right, you have Washu, Tokimi, and Tsunami. They created an infinite number of dimensions with older possibilities in order to search for a being greater than themselves. Each in their own way, Tokimi created chaos, Washu stripped herself of her chosen powers, essentially, became a human professor with the sun, and Tsunami made a pact with a pirate clan, which would grow to become Jirai later on. Thus you have part of the setting for the movie. For right now, just try to keep that setting or the multiverse kind of layered cake in the back of your mind.
There's a lot.
In 1999, Tenchi Muyo, who's the original creator, like Dan said here, made Dual Parallel Trouble Adventure. Dual was a cross between a slice of life, slapstick comedy, sci-fi anime, giant robots, had some military overtones. Kazuki Yosuke, who's essentially the class nut at his high school, can see visions of a parallel world. After being shanghaied by the prettiest girl in school, he ends up being transported to this parallel world by her mad scientist father. Without going into a ton of detail, suffice to say that Kazuki has to figure out how to get home, fight off the war that's happening in his parallel dimension, and also live with new housemates in typical Tenchi style. By the end of Duel, Kazuki's acquired a giant mecha or robot, which is powered by a Jiraiyan tree seed. This is what all the tree ships of Jirai use for light hawk wings and other things. He also fights a huge Jiraiyan tree battleship from many millennia ago. Duel covers just 4 of the parallel dimensions, and if you dig deeper into it, reveals a lot about how the Tenchiverse at large works. So besides being a really good or a really great standalone series, it also helps you explore things better in the main Tenchiverse and kind of dig into it and really get some meat out of it. To step off to the side just a second, a lot of folks generally have questions about light hawk wings. What are they? Where do they belong in all this mess? Why are they important? To give an example, the kind of spreading out things there that look like wings, those are light hawk wings in the series. Tenchi, the character Z, Jiraiyan ships, and several other beings can produce light hawk wings. In pretty much all cases, they are a manifestation of Tsunami's power through her trees that she provided to the pirate clan. First generation ships have a better connection of a sort than subsequent generations, so they are more powerful. Newer ships tend to be weaker, and they also can't produce as many wings. And although the trees pick their owner, essentially, or who they bond with, essentially the people who end up bonding with the newer trees end up in positions of power and Jirai. The wings such as themselves, or the wings themselves, as in Tenchi's case, are actually a manifestation of him using a higher form of energy to create something from nothing. That's why when Washu and Clay and several of the other characters take notice of Tenchi, because he's creating something on his own rather than tapping into some other power. That's indicated like OVA 2. Some examples are different forms of light hawk wings. That's from GXP. There's Tenchi. Moving right along, in 2002, Kodashima made Tenchi GXP. You may have seen this run recently on Toonami or the Funimation channel. GXP itself stands for the Galaxy Police, and this time the main antagonist, who is Seina Yamada down there in the bottom middle. Essentially, Seina is a person with incredibly poor or terrible luck. The Galaxy Police wanted to recruit Tenchi himself and get all of his power, but due to Seina's luck, they ended up
off into space. Eventually, as Seina requires more friends and crew, he gains a ship and, due to his bad luck, attracts many space pirates, which are subsequently captured to the delight of the GXP and Jirai. A lot of GXP had historical ties to Duel. Episode 17 in particular is even titled Parallel as a nod to Duel. Some examples of the crossovers or the explanations are of like the Jiraiyan core units, the tree seeds, the previous pirates, and also when Sana acquires a giant mecha that is nearly a twin of Kazuki's unit in Duel, we're later told this mecha holds a tree seed, which was once a pear given to a traveler long ago. It's no stretch to see that the other tree seed is Kazuki's mecha in Duel. The difference here is that Sana's puts him in line for the throne of Jirai. GXP also had a Tenchi cameo episode where Sana goes back home to Earth and meets the Masaki household as they really are. Pirates, princesses, scientists, and you get to see Ryo-Oki and Fuku, who's Ryo-Oki's new little Cabot sister. Share some nice moments. You do at least get a snapshot of the original cast in a future setting. Here we see Sana, Washu, and Tenchi. GXP was made up of a very different sort of humor. It was well into harem territory and is still a subject of debate among fans even now. Kajishima himself didn't like the way it was directed, so for the last several years he's been releasing novels in Japan that continued the GXP story in his own way. As you'll notice from these covers and inserts, Mitsuki Sonata from Duel has a counterpart in the main Tenchi GXP storyline. Here, she is Mitsuki Runata, an AI in the GXP mainframe computer. So again, going back to the parallel dimensions, each dimension can be a little different. Here you might be John Smith, in the dimension next door you might be Bob Smith, the next one you might be a different gender, or you might not even exist at all. Now moving right along again, in 2009 we got Asiki no Sakishi Monogatari, now known in English as War on Geminar. Despite the recent announcement that this is new Tenchi, the series has already been out for a few years subbed. 15 years after GXP, we find Tenchi's half-brother Kenshi Masaki being sent to yet another parallel world. This is the world of Geminar. Here, male mecha pilots are sort of regarded as political pawns and breeding stock. Kenshi fails in an attempt to get home and becomes a servant at the school for pilots. Being that he has the physical capabilities of the Masaki family, he often exhibits great stamina, fighting prowess, kindness, and strength. While most of the series is learning about Geminar or the characters doing tasks, it does eventually get around to the conflict. Kenshi has to establish a base, he collects his team, and has to counterattack to take back their school and lands from an opposing force. So how does this all fit together? Well, Duel fills in parts about the Tenchi OVA, Tenchi GXP, and has ties to Pretty Sammy, or at least the Mahoshi Special. GXP ties in directly with OVA 3, introducing a lot of the characters that pop up suddenly. Geminar takes place well after both GXP and OVA 3, and while it doesn't directly reference the main cast other than in a couple spots, you do see more of a multi-dimensional conflict caused by Tokimi. So it's a nice kind of wraparound. It's also worth noting that the much older Kajishima series called Photon, there it is there, contributes a great deal to Geminar's environment and technology. So you could say that Photon is to Geminar what Duel is to Tenchi. Beyond this, there's also a great deal of material we don't understand, and that being the doujinshi and novels I mentioned before. Doujinshi are sort of a self-published magazine that authors in Japan tend to produce when they want to release something directly, but not go through a major publisher. Kajishima typically puts out 2 or 3 doujinshi a year. Here are some examples. This one you can see what fans have called Tenko or Ryoko's daughter, but we're not really sure what this is. Here's a couple covers. This one's from the historical period of Washu's time at the academy. You've got Naja, Washu, and I believe that's Mikimo and Washu's son. Here are some older Jiraiyan characters. You've got Misaki, Lady Funaho, Azusa, another couple of characters you'll see later on. We know of one that deals with the future where Sasami's in her late teens. That's from the Omaki Dojin. And also here we've got a couple dojins from Duel. And this one here shows the kind of ancient race that's D's people from Duel. that were chased by pirates. And this one comes well after the one with Sasami in the future, detailing where Tenchi has a son and the main cast has moved back to Jirai sometime in the future. Here's some other examples as well of various doujinshi. Overall, there's probably around 60 of them so far. But overall, most of these we do not know much about even today. So if you happen to know of anyone that has an interest in translating or maybe a little bit of background in it, we'd certainly like to work with them in order to unveil more of the Tenchiverse and help spread that knowledge around the fandom. And with that, I'm out of time, so sorry if all of that exposition wasn't any more clear than mud. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to talk with you after the panel. Chuck, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out at this late hour. And I'm going to pick up right off where JG Zin left off with the doujins. Just what is a doujin exactly? A doujin is self-published art book by the artist itself, in this case Masaki Kajishima. They're limited to a release, probably about 300 each release, and they need to be translated because they only come in Japanese. And they're usually short stories or art sketches or some combination of the two. There are about 60, give or take, one or two Kajishima doujins that we know of at the moment, and those are the ones that we draw our information from. Why should we care about these doujins, you ask? Well, because they include lots of explanations of events that happen in the anime, and they introduce a lot of the characters that appear. And this is especially important because when we consider OVA 3...
Events that happen in OVA 3, which is notorious for introducing so many new characters that we had never seen before, but in fact they had been introduced years before in Japan through these doujinshis and novels. So in that respect, it can be a little bit more convenient to get in touch with the characters. Also, it continues the main plot. I mean, why are we still interested in Tenchi? Because it hasn't ended yet. And so this is the continuation of the plot. And most importantly of all, these doujinshi in the back, Kajishima always includes a little note about what he's doing next. And sometimes, as I will soon reveal, they can portend some very, very big announcements. I listed some examples. In fact, in the latest doujinshi that was just released a few weeks ago at Comiket, we got word that there will be new Tenchi material, more than likely animated, this year. So, the novels. This is one of Kajishima's novels right here. I know it's very tiny. I only saw this for the first time today, and I was taken aback by how small it is. But these things are packed with very cool stuff and backstory of a lot of characters. They were released in the mid-90s, and they circle around, because there's three of them. This one is about Washu, her past, and her status as a god, and her time at the Galaxy Academy, and leading up to the creation of Ryoko. And it's very cool, and there's two others that are worth mentioning. The first one is Jirai. This deals with Ayeka and Sasami's father, Azusa. It deals with his time on Earth and his ascension to the throne of Jirai. And this one is cool because it reveals a lot about the backstory of the characters and the future of Tenchi Muyo. As you can see there's his wives, Little Misaki and Funaho. Second novel is Yosho, and as the title suggests, it deals with Yosho and his story of growing up on Jirai, meeting his first wife, Airi, and the best part of this book is that it has a detailed account of Ryoko's attack on Jirai, which we have only seen flashbacks, and it's very exciting and well worth the read. There's Airi, in fact, his first wife, and there's a scene from the attack on Jirai, very intense scene there. And there's the Washu one that I told you about earlier. That character you see there next to Washu is named Naja Akira, and she's a scientist who was very close friends with Washu. And when she died, Washu then cloned her, and that process sort of set along the motion of creating Kagito, who we all revere as the great villain of OVA 1. And that's Washu's son that was only very briefly shown in a flashback in the second OVA, and that's much more fleshed out in the novel. My favorite part of Tenchi printed material is by far the manga, and that is Hitoshi Okuda's manga, which was 2 series. It ran for over 10 years, and it was initially based off of the OVA, but once they stopped being made, it really went off into new territory, and for a long time it was the only Tenchi material that was coming out, and it really lived up to the reputation that Tenchi had garnered for itself. These are some very fine stuff, and they are available. They were officially translated into English, and you can still come across them on Amazon, and they're well worth the read. I highly suggest it. I love this series. The first series is No Need for Tenchi, and it directly follows the events of OVA 1. It introduces new recurring characters, and these characters really come to define the role of the arc, and it's really entertaining because the characters fit. They just fit so well with the existing cast, and they lead to some very, very epic arcs, some short stories that involve these characters, and more than often than not, some very touching stories. This new character is my personal favorite, Minagi. She is a clone of Ryoko, but instead of being fierce and fighting all the time, she's actually a real sweetheart, and she's, in the end, has a very tortured past with her creator, Yakagi, and she is the longest recurring character in the manga, and it's always a pleasure to see her pop up. Next we have the aforementioned Yakagi. He was a former student of Washu, much like Kagato, and he was the creator of Minagi, and unlike Kagato, he was obsessed with creating the perfect sword, and once he had found out that Tenchi had defeated Kagato using the Lighthawk sword, it was only a matter of time before he was coming to knock on Tenchi's door and challenge him to a duel. But as it found out, his intentions are much more noble than Kagato's. And finally, the third major recurring character is Yume. She is a classmate of Washu from the Galaxy Academy, genius in all respects, but very naive and unaware of customs of the world. Sometimes rival, sometimes friend. Yumi is always a pleasure to see, especially because of her great chemistry with Washu. They easily prey off of each other's weaknesses and tendencies. And the second series, which is a direct sequel, is called All New Tenchi Muyo. It takes place after OVA 2, and it contains some much darker themes and arcs, and eventually brings in some material that was very closely related to OVA 3. It's just as good as the first series, if only slightly shorter. And that concludes my portion of the panel.
Any questions we can take from them?
So now that we've just thrown 20 years of information at you, any questions? I figured there would be one asking why Tree Berger didn't come back as Ryoko in OVA 3.
OVA 3, was that the one that was released in like 05?
Yes.
Is that worth watching? Or? I'd say it.
Yeah.
I liked it.
Yeah.
That was good.
I would say watch it, at least for, seeing what happens.
Yeah, I'm not the only Paul's Pachishimi canon. I think so only Tenchi I've seen is what we talked about in the movies that
Yeah.
So I just recently bought Universe. That was the one I liked the most out of the Tsunami show.
Yeah.
So I'm still watching it. And I've heard about Ryoko, the third one.
Ryoki?
Yeah, and I saw some reviews people saying it's crap and that Ryoko is weak and stuff.
Well, OVA 3, when Kajishima was making the series, he didn't really want to do, at that point, Tenchi anymore. He wanted to do GXP, he wanted to do what would become War on Gemini. He had that wrote all the way back in 2001. But because he had a contract with AIC, they made him make one. And so he tried to scrunch 7 years of doujinshi into 7 episodes, and it was just all kinds of things flying at you. For Japanese fans, it was a lot easier to get hold and understand who these characters were, but from the English side of things, the majority of people, they saw it on Toonami. And then they see OVA 3, and, oh look, Yoshio had a first wife, and here's Seto, and here's Airi, and here's Noike. And here's his sister, who looks exactly like his mother. She's 80. His father's actually 200 years old. And just a whole bunch of things that...
Not a lot of explanation.
Yeah, not a whole lot of explanation.
So I barely remember the first 2 OVAs, so I think watching the third one, probably, as you said, there's more questions than answers, so...
Like I said, it's... And, you know, being a Dub fan, I wasn't too happy that my favorite character didn't come back. Yeah, well, basically, if any of you guys have talked to Kyle Herrera, he's a really close friend of Katria's, and we talked to her recently, actually, in a podcast. And basically, Funimation is non-union, which means no guaranteed benefits, no, they can pretty much set whatever the salary is. And you'll notice a recurring trend through a lot of their shows, like for instance, like Trigun. Many of the people won't come back. The reason that those people don't come back is because at the end of the day, when they get done with Funimation, they might barely break even. And so, you know, Petria coming from California and not having, and almost having nothing to show for it. I mean, she has a fantastic voice. It's kind of counterintuitive. So her not coming back was definitely a big strike to all the Ryoko fans who wanted to hear her voice. And unfortunately, she got voiced by Mona Marshall, who is most known for doing 10-year-old boys. But yeah. But we did ask her if she wanted to do another series, and she said absolutely, anytime. So. Oh, and just to elaborate on something that was in there with the doujinshis, Kawashima likes to be vague in the end of stuff. He'll say, I'm working on something, and that's it. And then everybody freaks out because they're like, well, what's he working on? Is he working on this? Is he working on that? And he came out over the last 2 years and said he's been working on GXP novels, but those are separate, and he's working on multiple anime projects. So over the course of doujinshi that he released between the spring and the fall, he said, I'm working more on this, I'm working more on this. I'm trying to get something that's original, but it's hard to shoot for a company. And the general opinion is that we're going to get a War on Geminar 2, and that we're going to see an OVA 4, and then there's a third unnamed project that hasn't, you know, it's kind of up in the air at this point. But those are almost guaranteed at this point, with Kajishima making appearances. The latest Tenchi Dojin, instead of focusing on like Tenchi's half-brothers, sisters, dogs, whatever, is actually all about the Tenchi household. So spring is the big anime season of the year, and we're expecting a new Tenchi household for OVA 4. So that's exciting. I'm sorry, what? Oh, Kajishima? Someone on our forum asked the man who was streaming to go to the Kajishima booth, and near the Kajishima booth he took a picture of Kajishima. So, yeah. That's about it. Is there any more questions?
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about a bit of everything, including photography.
That's about it. Thank you, guys. Like I said,
if you got any further questions, we'll be happy to try and help you answer them outside or talk to you further about anything. They'd like to get the room set up for the next panel.
It's really hard to push 20 years into 50 minutes. It's really hard.
Well, you got a good crowd. We're here for most of it.
Thank you.
Cool.
No, I made it.
Yep. Sounds and all. Woody. Sound.
Make sure everyone
Yes.
has.